In 1878, a crimson sandstorm came howling out of the high desert and swallowed Dust Valley whole. Daylight vanished under a red gauze, turning the sun into a bleeding coin nailed to the sky. The storm moaned through alleys and under doors, poured grit into coffee cups and hymnals, erased boot prints as fast as men could make them. Wind rattled shutters like dice in a gambler's palm. Horses screamed. Somewhere, church bells stuttered, and then fell silent under the weight of dust. And out of that storm walked a man. He came through the red murk like a shadow pulled from the earth hat brim low, coat snapping behind him, a rifle slung across his back. Folks watching from doorways saw eyes pale as smoke, and a face cut by weather and distance. They didn't know his name yet. That would come later, passed in whispers. Ethan Cole, a man who'd scouted for the army once, years back, rode farther than maps went, fought in wars nobody won, a man who'd buried too many friends and too much of himself. He came to Dust Valley like men come to the end of a trail with dust on their boots and silence in their mouths. The storm died by evening. The town lay scoured and changed. Signs hung crooked. Sand filled the well out back of the saloon. Cattle bawled miles off where fences had blown flat. Ethan sat alone at a corner table, drinking coffee black as burned wood. He didn't drink whiskey. Folks noticed that. He watched the room the way men do when they've lived long by noticing things early. Sheriff Tom Mercer came over. A man, thick through the shoulders, badge, dull, with years. Name's Mercer, he said. Ethan nodded once. Used to scout for the Bluecoats, didn't you? Long time ago, Ethan said. His voice sounded like boots on gravel, low, rough, steady. Mercer pulled out a chair. We got trouble brewing out here. Comanche raids. Folks killed. Homesteads burned. Captain Briggs from the Army's riding in tomorrow. Looking to hire trackers. Men who know this country. Ethan sipped his coffee. Mercer studied him. That storm you walked out of this morning? That's what it's like out here now. All the time. Smoke and fire and folks running blind. Briggs aims to change that. Ethan set the cup down. Army's been aiming to change things out here since before I was born. Mercer leaned back. You hire on. Maybe it changes faster. Ethan didn't answer. He looked through the saloon window, where the last light bled out behind the buttes, painting the land, the color of old wounds. Captain Briggs arrived the next noon, with dust on his epaulettes and certainty in his eyes. 40 troopers clinked behind him, sabers chattering like teeth in cold water, though the day baked hot enough to warp the horizon. The Army flag hung limp, as if even cloth had learned not to brag out here. Briggs found Mercer on the boardwalk outside the general store. Found Ethan too, because Trouble and Ethan had started walking the same streets. You, Cole? Briggs asked, looking down from the saddle like he was reading a line in an order. Ethan tipped his hat without warmth. Used to be. Good. You'll earn it back. I need a scout. Ethan's gaze slid to the troopers. They were young good boots, straight spines, the kind of confidence that comes in a box-stamped U.S. You want a bloodhound or a conscience? He asked. Briggs smiled the way officers do when they don't like being corrected. I want a man who finds trails. Trails lead to people, Ethan said. People mean choices. Briggs swung down. Up close, his face carried a nice education and a hard ambition. My choice is simple. Families are dead. Farms burned. We hunt the men who did it and make sure it stops. By burning something bigger, Ethan said. Briggs's voice thinned. You ride for me, or you don't ride at all. Mercer's jaw bunched. Easy, Captain. Ethan set the coffee tin on the rail. I'll scout, he said finally. But I don't light fires. Not for you. Not for anybody. Briggs hesitated just long enough to look like he'd considered grace. You'll do it my way in the end, he said. Men always do. Ethan didn't bother to answer. They rolled out at dawn, the column, a steel spine across pale country. Ethan rode point, hat low, reading what the land had written in a thin hand. A broken stem here, a crescent of hoof there. Soot-like fingertips smudges along a rock ledge. Behind him, Briggs tried to make the desert obey his map. The desert laughed without sound. By sundown the first day, they'd found sign. A cold fire under a bluff, ash scattered like gray coins. A strip of calico snagged on catclaw. A heel print too small for a man. Ethan held it in his sight a long moment. Women? Briggs asked. And kids, Ethan said. Briggs's mouth flattened into a line that looked like orders. They move with the raiders. Or away from something worse, Ethan said. They made camp in a bowl of stone where the wind couldn't get organized. Ethan ate jerky that tasted like old leather and drank water that lied about being cool. He cleaned the Winchester. Slow. The way a man says prayers who no longer believes, in the part where somebody answers. Massa, drop beside him. You're thinking, the sheriff said. I'm remembering, Ethan answered. Brazos? Ethan's knuckles whitened without his permission. Brazos. He didn't say more. He didn't need to. Men had told the story for him, how a captain with a clean coat decided fire ended arguments, how a scout with a dirty conscience left the army with nothing but a scar and a promise not to help light that kind of night again. The attack came at dawn, the second day, riders falling from the ridges like the day had tilted. A hawk cry cut the light. Lances flashed. Rifles cracked sharp as ice. Horses screamed. Troopers tried to build a square from confusion. Ethan moved like water around rocks, rifle punching steady thunder into the dust. He saw faces painted with war lines, eyes bright as new coins. A young man on a dun pony who grinned when bullets shaved his braid and then was gone, smoke closing like a curtain. They broke contact in under a minute. 7 troopers didn't get up. 3 did, bleeding into the ground like it might soak up their names and keep them safe. Cowards, Briggs shouted at the empty hills. Hit and run. They hit where they picked, Ethan said, voice flat. They ran. Because they wanted to. Briggs wheeled on him. You talk like them. I talk like a man who's seen what happens when you chase a ghost into a canyon, Ethan said. They're pulling you. Briggs took a long breath that tried to calm him and failed. We follow. Ethan stared past him to the south, where heat already made the land look like a lie. They'll split. 1 band left to bait you. 1 right to hit something softer. What? Mercer asked. Us, Ethan said. Or Dust Valley. Mercer swore under his breath. Briggs hesitated, torn between the map in his head and the one written on the ground. Ambition chose for him. We follow, he repeated. We finish this. Ethan didn't argue. Some men only hear the lesson after the test. They rode. The land narrowed until it felt like a throat. Shadows pooled in cracks deep enough to bury a city. Late afternoon, the trail forked. 1 branch west into broken rock, the other bending north toward buttes carved like altars. Split, Briggs ordered. Mercer, take 10 left. Cole with me. They took the North Fork. The light went old gold, then copper, then the color of dried blood again. The world smelled like iron. Ethan's skin prickled, the way it had the moment before a shell hit at San Carlos, the way it had every time Mercy lost the vote. He slowed. Don't like it, he said. Briggs's mouth tightened. I don't like any of it. Captain, Ethan said, scanning the ridges. You hear that? What? Exactly, Ethan said. And then the world erupted. Rifles flamed from both rims. Horses reared. Men shouted. The canyon gobbled sound and spit it back jagged. A boulder shuddered loose and came down like a god's fist, smashing a trooper and his mount into a shape the earth accepted without complaint. Ethan dragged Briggs under a lip of stone and shoved the captain's head down with something more like friendship than respect. "Stay," he snapped, then leaned out and started answering the rifles with that patient, punishing accuracy only men who have shot too much carry in their bones. A blur moved on the rim feather. Braid, a lithe body rolling with the stone like he'd been born from it. The young rider from Dawn. Ethan sighted, then didn't shoot. The kid had eyes like he deserved another day. Ethan snapped around at the muzzle flash next to him instead. The flash added a scream to the air and then went quiet. "Cole!" Briggs gasped beside him. "Do something." "I am," Ethan said, and made 3 men choose somewhere else to be. It broke fast, as ambushes do when the spring doesn't set right. The Comanche melted. Briggs stood, shaking with relief and fury. "We chase. We survive," Ethan said, and clamped the captain's arm before he could fling them into a second slaughter. Silence seeped back, sticky and hot. They picked up the wounded, counted the not wounded, didn't say the number out loud because men sometimes need lies they can carry. Then they turned back, the way men always do when they realize they've driven past the edge of their own luck. Dust Valley lay under a clean sky when they crested the last rise. Too clean. Smoke should have hung from cook fires. Instead, the air smelled like something that had decided to be patient. At the river crossing, hoofprints churned the mud into soup. 18 men, maybe 20. One set of prints smaller than the rest, a good horse ridden by a man with bad intentions. They'd skirted the camp, headed east toward homesteads with soft walls and softer hearts. Briggs cursed. Mercer went white. Ethan turned Ironfoot without thinking. "Ride," he said. They cut the distance like men who knew a child's scream rides the wind farther than a bugle ever could. They found the Norton place smoking, door smashed. A doll face down in the yard with one glass eye, staring at a sky that didn't care. Mrs. Norton sat on the step, hands black where she'd beaten the fire and lost. Mr. Norton lay farther out where he'd tried to stop a hard world with a soft chest. The girl Lucy was gone. Ethan took a long breath that tasted like Brazos. "They split again," he said softly. 5 riders with a small one, across a saddle, east. Briggs looked sick and angry, and something else men hate, admitting scared. "We go." "Just us," Ethan said. "No column." Quote, "Why? Because I can catch what I can't lead," Ethan said, and was already swinging into the saddle. Mercer fell in. Briggs cursed again and followed because pride can ride fast when it has to. They chased the small sign's cloth snagged on a mesquite thorn. Water drips where a canteen had leaked. A scuff on a rock that said a pony had stumbled. Near dusk, they saw dust ahead, a thin ribbon like a slow fuse. Ethan cut low into a wash, crawled the bank, and looked. 5 riders, 1 child lashed to a second saddle, hair bright as a new penny. Lucy. She didn't move. "Alive," Ethan whispered, though he couldn't hear her breath. Some part of him needed the word. "Plan?" Mercer asked. "Break the line. Take the girl. Make them choose between pride and blood." Briggs blinked. "They'll shoot her." "Not if they're men," Ethan said. "Only if they're stories." He moved first, because he always had. 3 shots in 2 breaths, 1 man down, another thrown, the third's horse rearing savage. Mercer took the right clean, a good lawman when there was no law. Briggs charged center, saber up, ridiculous and brave and somehow alive at the end of it. Ethan tore Lucy free as the rider swung, took the blow on his shoulder, smelled the leather and sweat and fear that makes the West eternal. He shoved Lucy into Mercer's arms and turned into the strike, drove his shoulder into the man's chest so hard the day left his eyes like a candle pinched. Then they were running again, dust kicking, bullets whining like angry bees. They didn't stop until the world decided they could. Dust Valley rose like a tired promise. Mrs. Norton folded Lucy so tight the girl squeaked. The town breathed out one big breath that made the cottonwoods shiver. Ethan slid off Ironfoot and leaned against the rail until his legs remembered the trick. He felt the bruise blooming in his shoulder and the older ache blooming behind his ribs. People came with thanks that sounded like apologies for having needed him. He took them without words, because words were fragile tonight. Silas McGraw watched from the alley with his grin like a bad knife. "You brought them back, so they can suffer again later," Silas said. Ethan didn't look at him. "You planning to help with that?" Silas's grin widened. "Planning to make a living." Marshal Avery Hale stepped between them like a man who knew where fights lived. "Evening, McGraw." "Mars Hal," Silas sang, as if the word were two. "You can't keep this town from choosing Wooded Island." "Maybe not," Hale said. "I can keep it from becoming what you are." Silas tipped an imaginary hat to Ethan and slid into the kind of dark that doesn't cool a man down. Night came on with a soft wind that knew how to touch bells. Sparrow Blackhawk's sister hung bluestone charms along Ethan's fence and tied a braided token to his doorpost. "Kept," she said simply. "While this hangs, riders of our blood walk wide." Ethan thumbed the strand. One red thread ran through the black and white hair like a road. "Does it keep Pinkertons?" he asked. "Nothing keeps men who sell paper," Sparrow said. "Only shame. And they do not buy that." She left bread still warm and a gourd of sweet water. Two kids peeked from behind her skirt with eyes like daring. "They think you are a story," she translated from their silence. "Try to live like a man." He nodded, as if he knew how. The bells spoke after midnight, one chime, then three, west, then north, the language of wire and wind. Men in the yard. Hale stood from his chair like the night had cleared its throat. "Medics," he said. "And friends who like fire. Quinn too," Ethan said, tasting ink on the breeze. "And Tate." "Which way?" Hale asked. "The expensive way," Ethan said. "They didn't shoot first. Men who want to own tomorrow rarely do. They talked, the way rattlesnakes talk, with their tails polite enough to make the kill feel earned." Quinn unfolded a warrant, like an altar cloth. Tate didn't speak, smoke painting a loose question between his lips. Maddox held a bottle with a rag in its mouth and the wrong kind of smile. "You're under arrest, Cole," Quinn said mildly. "Obstruction. Incitement. Harboring threats to the peace." "What peace?" Ethan asked. "The kind we report," Quinn said. Hale stepped out beside Ethan. "You serve that paper tonight. You'll write the story of a dead town." Quinn's smile faltered. "We don't kill towns, Marshal. We put fences around them. Some of us choke." Hale said. Maddox struck the match. The bottle described a slow, stupid arc toward the window. Hale shot the glass in the air. It burst into a rain of fireflies that died quick in the dust. The yard fell very quiet, the way men do when their plans fall apart and they don't know whether to run or double down. On the ridge, a hawk cry. Riders stepped out of the night like parts of the land had decided to be people. Not charging, watching. Witness. But that kind of watching changes hearts or hardens them. Tonight, it did both. Tate flicked his cigarette into the trough and said without looking at Quinn, "We ain't burning this place." Maddox laughed, punched him in the mouth, turned to light another bottle and found Raven behind him, one hand holding his wrist, the other resting on a knife that spoke fluent truth. Maddox heard the language quick. Quinn folded the paper. "Another day," he said softly. "Another report." They backed off because sometimes retreat is the only way to keep a story alive long enough to sell it. The bells quieted. Sparrow's charms flashed once like a held breath let go. Hale holstered the Remingtons and sat back down because chairs are what save men like him. "What now?" Ethan asked. "Sleep a little," Hale said. "Work a lot." The town tried both. For 3 days, Dust Valley remembered how to be itself. Children raced along the hardpan and rang the school bell with shameless joy. Jonas the storekeep sold nails and salt and hope. The preacher put up a sign. Pies. Colorado FFEE. No speeches. And for once kept his word. But tomorrow never forgets its turn. Captain Briggs rode back with a smaller column and a bigger thirst for certainty. We found a village, he told Ethan. Families, dogs, smoke. His mouth worked around a decision. We left it standing. Ethan studied him. Saw the cost. Good. Briggs's eyes stayed on something far away. Didn't feel like winning. Maybe because it was, Ethan said. Word ran east faster than horses can. Papers called Dust Valley a tinderbox. Pinkerton wires hummed like cicadas. A lawyer in Abilene wrote the phrase federal jurisdiction 5 times on one sheet and folded it like a knife. Then Silas McGraw lit the night. He hit San Miguel Street with bottles and boys too dumb to know they were cheap. Flame leapt the saloon roof. Smoke clawed the stars. Jonas went down in the doorway, coughing black. Sparrow dragged 2 kids from the back by their collars, scolding in Comanche and English with equal ferocity. Hale shot out a window to vent heat and bought the building 1 more minute. Ethan hauled a woman in a dress big as a sail through a doorway small as a story, swearing without heat and laughing like a man who couldn't stop death but could delay it out of spite. Out back, Maddox stood with a torch and delight. Tate knocked the brand from his hand. No, he said simply. Blood from last time still at the corner of his mouth. You gone soft? Maddox jeered. Tate looked at Ethan, then at the town, then at the bottle grinning in his own damned hand. He dropped it in the trough. It hissed. He smiled at the sound like a man hearing his real name for the first time. Silas tried for the church bell rope. A bullet chewed the post by his head, Hale's way of saying don't without spending a life. Silas ran for the alley, and Ethan followed because that's how this kind of math works. They met behind the livery. Punches. Wood. Gravel. A gun that didn't go off where it meant to. Ethan pinned Silas to the wall with his forearm under the jaw, and the kind of patience those who live learn late. You don't win by being good, Silas rasped. You win by still being here, Ethan said. Hale arrived. Raven ghosted at the corner. Quinn and Tate came up breathing hard, uncertain which side of themselves they'd ridden with tonight. For a small bright instant, the town's whole argument stood breathing in one place. Law and paper, blood and mercy, greed and duty. The bell rang one pure note that sounded like tomorrow trying. Silas slipped away. Snakes do. The fire died. Smoke laid down like a tired dog. People counted names and said thank you by touching shoulders. Morning found Dust Valley soot-streaked and stubborn. Sparrow brought coffee to Ethan and thumped his shoulder like family. The bluestone charm on his door winked at the sun. Hale eased down the steps, hat low against a day too bright. Reckoning's not done, he said. It never is, Ethan said. He went to the corn row and thumbed soil around a spindly stalk, because that is the truest rebellion the West allows. 2 sunsets later, the army left for good, or said it did. Briggs shook Ethan's hand like a man who hated owing anyone, and rode east with 10 troopers, whose eyes had learned the difference between orders and consequences. Quinn wired something that read like surrender and smelled like strategy. Tate stayed, took a room over the bakery, and learned how to laugh without checking who owned the joke. Maddox vanished into a country that never runs out of places to hide bad men or bury them. Silas? He leaned in the doorways of the day and the corners of the night, smiling that thin cut of his, waiting for heat to make men stupid again. Ethan tried to live small. He mended his fence. He fixed the schoolhouse hinge. He helped Mercer dig a new well pit and listened to the sheriff talk about a wife who'd left because quiet scared her more than gunfire. Sparrow planted beans along the edge of Ethan's patch and told him not to insult the earth by doubting it. Raven came sometimes, said little, watched the wind. Blackhawk watched from the ridges, the way chiefs do when they've learned that being seen is sometimes stronger than being feared. Then the telegraph hammered a sentence Dust Valley didn't know how to hold. Railroad surveyors approaching. Federal marshal en route. Land claims to be adjudicated. Long words. Hard meanings. It always ends with somebody measuring what somebody else calls home. The surveyors arrived with tripods and cheerfulness that made men want to break something. They pounded stakes into ground that had never asked to be owned. They drew lines across ridges that refused to stay still. They shook hands with Silas McGraw and didn't see how they needed to count their fingers after. A federal marshal named Doolin came with papers in a valise and a tin star that had bled the shine out of too many arguments. He read the town a speech about destiny and progress. Hale slept standing up with his eyes open and woke to say, "Destiny looks a lot like theft when you're on the wrong side of the line." Doolin smiled. "Lines are the point, Marshal." "Not out here," Hale said. "Out here, points are the point." It got worse when a homestead north of the Cottonwoods went up at midnight. Not burned, moved. The house sat 40 yards from where it had been the day before. Planks leaning like a drunk who couldn't decide which way to fall. All 4 oxen were gone. A little boy's marbles lay in a neat line on bare ground because somebody had picked them up and put them there, so he'd have something to find when he came looking for what he'd lost. "Stagecraft," Quinn muttered. "Back in town. Somebody's writing the story for us." "Silas," Mercer said. "Silas doesn't write," Hale said. "He chews." They rode out anyway. Ethan found tracks pointing both ways, the kind of trick that divides a posse into smaller mistakes. They chose south and found nothing but wind. When they came back, Doolin had posted notices on half the doors in town with words like condemnation and eminent domain and due process. Jonas pulled one down and used it to light his stove. The smell of ink improved the coffee. That night, Sparrow hung more bells. The wind took their chime east and came back with an answer from the ridge. Raven's camp, maybe. Or some other thing that knew how to sing without a mouth. By morning, Doolin had deputized Silas McGraw. You could smell the mistake from the far side of the county. Silas pinned the tin with a grin and went to work writing law with his fists. Tate confronted him in the street and got a knee to the ribs for his trouble and a whisper in his ear nobody else heard. Tate went pale and sat on the edge of the boardwalk a long time, counting something only he could see. "Tell me," Quinn said. Tate shook his head. "Not yet." "Oh." By afternoon, the surveyor's stakes ran a line through the cottonwoods to the schoolhouse steps. "Right of way," Doolin said, tapping his valise. "The track will pass here." "Through the bell rope?" the preacher asked. "Progress rings its own," Doolin said. Raven rode down in daylight rare and dismounted in the street where the surveyors could see him. He didn't touch a weapon. He didn't have to. "No iron snake across that ground," he said calmly. "The graves under the cottonwoods wake angry." Doolin smiled, the kind of smile that gets men killed. "Treaties will be honored." "Name one," Raven said. Silas laughed and palmed his tin star so the sunlight caught it. "Law's on my side, Injun." Raven looked from the star to Silas's hand to the survey stakes marching like a small army. He plucked one from the earth and handed it to Doolin with a bow so slight it insulted nobody. "Then law can hold this," he said, and rode away before the morning could decide to go bad. It went bad at noon instead. Maddox returned with 6 men and a wagon full of ties. They started grading with shovels that swung like insults. Silas strutted. Doolin held papers up like a shield. Quinn watched with the guilty focus of a man trying to learn the trick so he can write around it later. Tate walked away and didn't come back until evening. Ethan stood under the cottonwoods and remembered a different rope. He closed his eyes, opened them, looked at Hale. "We stop it?" "For today," Hale said. "Tomorrow always wants a turn." They stopped it by not letting it start. Sparrow put a blanket on the ground and began a song in a language the surveyors didn't recognize, but their hands did. The shovels slowed. Jonas handed out lemonade with a smile that made men ashamed to take it. Mercer leaned on his rifle and looked like he'd count bullets aloud so the crowd could pace itself. Ethan sat on the school steps and sharpened a pencil until it was pretty as a spear point. Silas called them cowards. Hale nodded pleasantly and said, "We're alive cowards." Doolin threatened court. Jonas said the stove needed more paper. Quinn offered to mediate. Sparrow sang. By sundown, the ties still lay in the wagon, and the stakes lay in a pile like matchsticks that had thought better of it. Doolin retreated to his office to write a letter that would carry no music. Silas swaggered home alone, which is how swagger always ends. Maddox stared at Ethan a long time, and then at Tate, who looked back, with eyes that had remembered Brazos without being there. Night, bells, wind, the smell of rain that didn't come. Ethan sat at his table, hat on the peg, the blue stone braid making a shadow like a question mark on the door. He touched his shoulder where Silas's pistol had bruised him the week before. He touched the scar at his jaw where the Army's orders had nearly made him permanent. He thought about leaving. He thought about staying. He did neither. He waited, because sometimes the hardest kind of courage doesn't look like motion. A knock. Quiet. Tate. Walk, Tate said. They went to the edge of town, where the mesquite made small rooms for men to say things they shouldn't say indoors. Tate lit a cigarette, didn't smoke it. Maddox is going to burn the cottonwoods, he said, voice low. Tonight. Doolin won't see it. Silas will. Quinn'll write it pretty. They'll say it was an accident. Then the stakes go back in the ground. Ethan nodded once. How many? 4 with him. Plus me. If I pretend I didn't talk to you. Don't, Ethan said. Tate looked at the cigarette like it held an answer. I'm tired, Cole, of being the kind of story that buys ink by the bucket. He ground the cigarette under his boot, as if killing its small glow could change anything larger. Ethan squeezed his shoulder, thanks without ceremony. Tate flinched like a man who hadn't been thanked in the language he understood. They gathered their few. Hale, Mercer, Jonas for once, Raven, Sparrow, Black Hawk would watch. That was his part, and he did it like a cathedral. The preacher came with a bucket and a hymn he promised not to sing. Lucy Norton carried a bell that had once hung around a mule's neck. She said it was lucky. No one argued. Midnight. Fireflies stitched the ground into bright questions. The cottonwoods whispered, the way old trees do when they've learned the world keeps writing over the same sentence. Maddox came laughing, which is how men who fear nothing ask the dark to correct them. Silas wasn't with him too clever. Doolin slept or pretended. Quinn walked the far edge like a conscience with a notebook, ready to decide which side of the story paid better. Tate came last, and didn't meet anyone's eyes. The first bottle lit and flew. Sparrow caught it with a blanket and smothered it like an ant with a misbehaving child. The second hit the dirt and made a puddle of stars. Hale stepped out, badge catching a thin ribbon of moon. No, he said. Just that. Maddox grinned wider. You arrest me, Marshal? Not tonight? Hale said. Tonight I keep you from dying stupid. Bullets come easy when men think words won't. But nobody lifted iron. Not yet. Something about the trees made hands heavy. Raven put his palm on a trunk and said to no one, this one remembers the winter when men ate their horses. It fed them without asking their names. Maddox spat. Trees don't remember. Men don't either, Raven said. Quinn swallowed hard enough for the night to hear. Tate stepped into the light and faced Maddox. Enough, he said. We're done. Maddox swung. Tate took it, staggered, stood. I said, we're done. He looked at Ethan and Hale, then at the cottonwoods. We don't get to be this kind of story anymore. Silas's voice floated from the dark. You don't get to choose. Quote, watch me, Tate said, and for once he sounded like a law older than badges. Maddox charged. 3 things happened at once. Hale moved like a slow door closing. Raven's knife found a belt instead of a belly. And Quinn shouted a name that wasn't Maddox's. A raw slip that told the truth about who he feared losing. Maddox tripped, hit hard, lost his bottle, lost his breath, lost a slice of something he'd always thought unkillable. Nobody died. The cottonwoods kept their leaves. The fire went out under Sparrow's careful hands. Doolin signed a paper in the morning that said the right-of-way would curve around the trees, in deference to community sentiment. He didn't mention ghosts. He didn't mention courage. He did not mention that his pen shook a little. Silas left town for 3 days. When he returned, his grin had more teeth and less humor. That combination means storms. It started with a red sky and a quiet morning, the kind you think you can trust. Ethan saddled Ironfoot and found a note under the braid on his door. South Draw. Noon. Come alone. No signature. Silas's handwriting couldn't help looking smug even when it tried to look casual. He showed Hale. Hale said, "You'll go anyway." Ethan nodded. "I'll be late," Hale said, "and I'll be early enough." At the South Draw, heat gathered like a rumor. Silas waited on a black horse that deserved better. 2 men flanked him, Maddox, smiling again, and a third Ethan didn't know. Up on the rim, something caught the sun's spyglass, maybe. "Quinns, you came," Silas said, delighted like a child who'd trapped a cricket. "I keep appointments," Ethan said. Silas looked around theatrically. "Where's your choir? The marshal? The Indians? The Bluestones and the Bells?" "They sing when they want to," Ethan said. "Then hear this music," Silas said, and nodded. Men stepped out from behind Rock 6, 8 guns low. Not amateurs, not quite professionals. The West makes most men learn halfway to both. "You want me to reach?" Ethan said. "Or you want to try something new today?" Silas's eyes glittered. "I want to see if the circle around your house draws blood when you walk outside it." Ethan smiled without humor. "You could have found out any night you were brave enough to knock." Maddox laughed, lifted his gun, and the world decided to stop pretending. Rifle cracks from the rim, 2 sharp truths. Maddox's hat jerked. The unknown man's sleeve bloomed red. Hale's silhouette stood against the sky, like a sermon delivered without words. Raven ghosted from the shadow of a mesquite, and the balance of the draw tilted away from fools. Silas fired first. He always would. Ethan moved the way a man moves who's tired of learning the same lesson with his ribs. Lead chewed dirt. Ironfoot screamed. The bells Ethan couldn't hear rang somewhere anyway. Close now. Too close for rifles. Too honest for lies. Hale took a bullet in the hat brim and grinned like a man who'd kept all his hair. By choice. Raven disarmed a stranger with a twist of the wrist that looked like mercy until you saw the pain on the man's face. Quinn shouted from the rim, "Stop!" in a voice that wished it still had the right to command. Silas and Ethan met in the middle. Fists first. Guns last. The West respects order when it reaches this part. They traded pieces of themselves, knuckle, blood, spit, memory. Silas broke Ethan's lip. Ethan broke Silas's grin. It looked like a draw until Silas reached for the small gun he carried low, the one he used to win when men thought the fight had agreed to rules. Ethan saw the move late. Hale saw it early. Hale's shot snapped Silas's wrist sideways. The little gun fired into the dirt like a bad thought going harmless for once. Silas stared at his hand as if it had betrayed him, then at Hale as if men who stand between 2 other men should apologize. "You don't get to be the ending," Hale said quietly. Sirens of the old kind women yelling names echoed from the town. Dust rose where riders came, Blackhawk and 10. No more. Enough. Sparrow at the front. Because sometimes the song leads the charge. Silas looked around and saw a shape he didn't like. A town deciding again. He backed his horse, eyes promising later. "Tomorrow," he said. Hale holstered slow. "Tomorrow's heavy," he said. "You sure you can lift it?" Silas spat and rode. Maddox followed, laughing like a man who has learned nothing. The others scattered, pieces of a plan that wouldn't remember its own shape by morning. Raven stood with his hands open, palms scarred, face peaceful in a way that didn't invite argument. Quinn climbed down from the rim, paper gone limp in his pocket. He looked at Ethan, at Hale, at Sparrow. "I can write this 2 ways," he said. "I'd like the one that lets me sleep." "Then don't write it," Sparrow said. "Remember it." Quinn nodded, surprising himself, and tore the page from his notebook. He didn't throw it away. He put it in his coat. That is how some men keep their word. They rode back together, a ragged procession of people who had not become what the night wanted. Doolin waited in town with a face already angry. He saw Blackhawk and counted. He saw Silas absent and counted again. He saw Hale whole, Ethan breathing, Sparrow smiling, Raven watching, Quinn quiet, Tate standing on the bakery steps with flour on his hands and sunlight on his hair, and he did not know what number to say. He left without speaking, because sometimes not losing is the only win a man can manage. Evening laid honey on the cottonwoods. The bells moved 1, then 2, then none. Children chalked hopscotch squares on the hardpan in colors that had no business surviving in this light, and did anyway. Jonas hammered a new sign. Peas. Colorado FFE. No speeches, and added smaller, underneath, bells. Welcome. Ethan sat his steps with a cup that steamed like a promise, and watched the road that had carried so much away keep offering new comings. Hale joined him. They said nothing for a long time. "Think he'll try again?" Ethan asked at last. Hale tipped his hat back. "Silas, tomorrow is the only religion he's got." "And us?" Hale considered the cornrow, the bluestone charm, the school bell rope flicking in a light wind. The line of the hills a man could read like a song if he'd learned the tune. "We'll keep choosing," he said. "That's all any place can do." Sparrow crossed the yard with a small loaf and a bigger grin. "The beans will climb this week," she announced, "because news like that saves towns in a way posters never have." Raven stood under the cottonwoods and put his hand on the bark. Blackhawk watched from the ridge and did nothing, which sometimes is everything. Night came honest. The lantern on Ethan's table made a ring of gold that did not pretend to be a circle big enough for the whole town, but it lit the hands that would protect it. The bells sang when the wind asked, then slept when it didn't. Somewhere east a train called, far enough to be a story. Somewhere south lightning stitched the horizon and didn't come closer. Somewhere west, Silas told himself a version of today that let him swallow and stand and promise his mirror that tomorrow would be kinder to him than he had been to anyone else. Ethan touched the scar at his jaw and then the braid on his door. The red thread looked dark in lamplight, bright in his mind. He set the cup down and wrote 3 words on a scrap he pinned by the charm where he'd see them each morning. He blew out the lamp. The dark stepped in, familiar, unthreatening. The road lay quiet. The house breathed. The town dreamed. The bells did not ring. It wasn't a happy ending. It wasn't an ending at all. It was a place deciding, again, to live. And out here, under a sky big enough to hold grief and hope at once, that was the kind of story worth telling today, tomorrow. And as long as the wind remembered the tune,